Well, it's lunchtime somewhere in the world, at least by Pete it is, because we've all determined that our time goes around Pete's time. So if lunch is at noon Eastern, we're all eating lunch at noon Eastern. And Mac joining us today from outside the operating room, apparently, not really, but he is ready. They run scared. You know, if you see an audio guy with a mask and gloves, nothing good to come from there, eh? So I better address something really quickly. Due to the automation systems of webinaring today, even though we announced that we were at 12 Eastern, we the webinar early on had noon Central. So that means we're starting a little early for people maybe that 2 weeks ago that registered. Send out an update, but that's not guaranteed. So Pete, here's what I'm gonna
Well,
require of you.
I'm just gonna start from the beginning in an hour.
Great, exactly what I was
Right.
going to say.
Exactly.
So we're going to have a conversation. We're going to do your RF spectrum scans. We're going to have a little chat with some of our friends from the IAS panel and do some pickups on those questions. And then at noon, 1 o'clock Eastern, noon Central,
We'll rewind.
we're going to do this again, but we're going to do a rebroadcast live. All right, this has never been done before. Back-to-back live broadcasts. Well, I guess that's technically the news. Never mind.
Exactly.
So we're just going to repeat the same thing over again, like the news. So anyhow, Q&A. Mac, Pete, why don't you guys talk about how we're going to deal with Q&A? Not that this is anything new. Which way is it? I'm going to pop off and let you guys chat, and then Pete, you take it away from here and you can introduce our panel when you're ready.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Mac. Oh, well, that's okay. I can do it. So if you want to ask questions on your webinar control panel, there's a little question tab. You can pull that and ask questions. You won't see the questions from others necessarily, unless sometimes they come through, sometimes they don't. But they'll be passed on to me, and we'll get to the questions as you send them in. So what I'm going to talk about today is spectrum scans, which I started doing a few years ago because I was interested in the collection of information for myself. I would do a scan outside of a venue and then do a scan inside the venue, and I would compare those. And typically, the ones outside the venue are higher. So here's, like, for instance, the outside scan and the inside scan for a venue. And this was for a show that obviously had a lot of wireless in it. But I was able to have the advantage of knowing that when I'm inside, a lot of the interference I was getting in the above channel 35, which 37 rather, was going to be going away. So I was able to use those areas pretty easily. This is a scan from a long time ago, back in the days when we had the 600 megahertz band. I can't even remember those days. That was about before we had, I think, fax machines, I think. But so the advantage for me was I did both scans, and I always start with the outside scan in my coordination because that's the worst case. And then if I find I have to squeeze in a whole lot of frequencies, I'm having a problem, then I look at my inside scan and import it and continue from there. Let's see if I can find the right tab here. That's not the right tab. How about this one? That's better. So on my website, I was collecting the scans, and I put them in an area called spectrum scans. And if you scan down a little bit, as it were, you can see on the left here the list of all the people that have given me scans. And some of them have green, which means that the scans came within the last 6 months. And yellow is older than 6 months, less than a year. And red is over a year. Now, in the United States, that's really important because things are changing a lot. And so the ones that are over a year for the United States are problematic. You're not going to get a very good information. Now, when you're doing your work in IAS, the selection of what you actually want to use, if I can find the IAS window, it's hidden underneath all my windows. You can use the TV wizard to look up a particular TV station and get the information from the FCC website. For various reasons, it's never quite right. There might be one station that's extra, one station that's not. I'm always suspect that if the station doesn't show up on my scan, but the FCC says it's there, that it might pop up because maybe they turned off the transmitter that day. I don't know. So obviously the important thing is when I do a scan and I see that there's a channel there, but the FCC website says there isn't one there, well, now I know. So when I do these scans, I load them into the bottom. I do my TV wizard, and we'll get to that in a minute. And the comparison on the bottom, I right click on the particular channels that I want to make go away or be not part of my TV stations, and then I can do my coordination. In the website, website is this one right here, right? If you go down a little bit further, there's a list of cities, and it's sorted by location. So here's Cleveland, and I can scan all the way down here, get down further. Here's Houston. Here's a current one in Houston from Stan Hunter. Here's some over 6 months ones here, and here's over a year. So it's pretty much, there's a lot of them, and I suppose I could throw away all the United States ones over a year and just keep the international ones because they're always useful. But I haven't really done that yet. I like seeing all the red. I don't know. So here is the map, and all of those up there are mapped by longitude and latitude, and have a link not only to the scan file right here, but a link to a map, so you can actually see where the venue is. And if my particular venue doesn't show up on the list above, I can zoom in on this map here and get here into Dallas. And here's a current one in Dallas. But let's say it's not at this is not at my venue, but my venue is really over here somewhere. Well, this is going to be fairly reliable here, unless the person only took an inside scan, and that's something you have to be careful about. Jesse Stern did this, and what I have in this database is I keep track of the coordinator's name, and I give you a little bio on the person, and show this is the link for the Dropbox download, and then this is the link for the map. So here's the map. There's zooming right in on the convention center in Dallas, so I can actually see where it is and find where the scan was done. So once I put the scans in here, they can be downloaded, but all coordinators don't do their scans in the same software. They could be using directly Shure hardware equipment. They could be using wireless workbench to do the scans with Shure hardware. They could be using Sennheiser equipment to do the scans. They could be doing scans with a TTI scanner. These are the ones that I typically carry with me. These two right here. And what I do is I usually do my scan with a TTI because it's conveniently small and I can fit it in my backpack. always carry it with me. I'm not, this is a 60 megahertz scan right there. So you can see there's some TV stations and a little bit of weekday TV here and TV stations up here. Here's the same thing on a Keysight Field Fox, but I've set it up, the Field Fox, so I have a blue peak scan. So that's peak signal, and this is average down here. So the peak will catch intermittent signals. If I happen to be scanning the area in channel 14, 15, 16, which have land mobile stuff in it, I can actually see the signals pop up there, whereas they won't be popping up in the average scan. When I actually use this and download the scans to a USB stick and put them into my files, I do them in 60 megahertz chunks, which gives me reasonable definition in the picture. I'm not really interested in individual frequencies that might be there. I'm really interested in what TV stations are there. So here's 10 stations there in 60 megahertz in the United States. So after I load my scan into IIS and I do my coordination, I use the Field Fox just because it has a keyboard. I can easily, quickly look at one particular frequency in maybe a 1 megahertz window to see if anything's within 200 megahertz of it, that kind of stuff, where I know I have to maybe change the frequency. So that's more for actually running the show. Let me get back to here. And here. So let's go back to the scans now and look at what happens with the scans. Here we'll go over to an Excel sheet. And I'm going to share the Excel there. Okay, I use Excel to adjust the scans, and scans come usually they're usually in CSV format. Other applications come in different formats, but in essence, they're all text files. So I can load them into Excel and manipulate them. Now, the thing about TTI scans is they come in with a text field at the top explaining what the whole scan is about. And I'm going to load a recent file here. This is one from Al Craig, and this is one from WSM from Sennheiser, and it is a much different file format than all the others. This one, there's obviously, it's not a straight text, and you have to convert this, not only the decimal point in the frequency, but the levels. So you'd use what I use is a macro to do this.
You're not sharing the screen right now.
I'm not. Oh,
You
it's no
turned
fair.
it off, man. Okay, now you got to start over. You said this was from Craig, Al Craig. It was for WSM, so maybe you can show from that point.
There you go. This is the one with the Sennheiser. Now you have it.
Right. So we want to back up before you populated the screen. Is that possible?
No, well, no, I just loaded a file. I just loaded a file. I loaded a CSV file. And the kind of file you want to actually have from a TTI, I'm going to open a file from, on my Mac, you can't see this probably, but that's okay. I'm just opening a file.
Awesome. It's kind of like the invisible man, the invisible RF coordinator.
Come on. My computer is doing crazy things. Okay, well, I didn't want it to do that, but it did it. So I opened actually, went to a box and opened 6 different CXV files on one thing, which is not what you'd normally do. But here, I just wanted to show you in the TTI scan, it has all the details on what you've set your computer to and what you set your scanner to do that. Now let me close all these millions of windows that are here. If I go to load that in to TTI, I'm going to go back to the IAS file, go load that into IAS, and now I'm going to share the IAS file. So now if I go to load that in, let me move some windows around here because this is getting too crazy here. I need a bigger screen. So, okay, this is not working here. There we go. So I'm going to go and load in the sweep data. And then in IAS, on the edit screen, there's a button called import sweep data. So I can, right now, this is a blank file I started out with, and it's showing the entire spectrum, all of the VHF spectrum, and from channel 14 to 900 in the UHF spectrum. I'm only really interested in channel 14 up to channel 37. So I zoomed in on that section of it. If I want to get back to where I was before, I can unzoom to the whole thing and zoom in on a different section. So I'm only going to look at this little segment right here. So I'm going to import RF sweep data, and let me do this. Let me share the whole screen. Yes, it will share the screen. Okay. So here now I have an open box here to find the file, and I'm going to go to a file that I did at the Metropolitan Studios. What it did is it went to load the file and it couldn't find the right information. I'll do that again. So import, and I want scan files is what I want. So here's New York. That was I was loading an IAS file as a scan. So here's my New York Metropolitan Studios on 1218 outside the studio. And if you look at the files, here's the 60 megahertz chunks approximately. The VHF are not in 60 megahertz chunks, but the UHF are in 60 megahertz chunks. And although I don't need them all, I've scanned all the way up to what was 700 megahertz, channel 44, 60 megahertz chunk. And I'll put that in there and I'll show you where it shows up. So I did an open on all these files. Now I do the open. It goes, since the files are accepted and are the right format, it goes to the section, the first thing where it allows me to enter details on this scan, which then would be saved in the PWS IAS database. But I can just skip that. And here's my scan from that site, so I can see what the scan had. If I wanted to go back and actually get TV Wizard, I'm going to go and do TV Wizard for US, and I'm going to do 10027, which is the zip code near where this venue is. And I'm going to do a search. And import. And it fills in all the TV stations that are in New York City. And it shows here down in the scan the colors. Now I've adjusted my colors in options because I guess I get bored on site and I do things like that. But so here's two stations which are DTV, which are not listed in the database as being DTV. So I'll change those to DTV. And this one is clear, and I'll get rid of it. And this one is DTV, and this one is clear, I'll get rid of it. And this one is DTV, and this one is DTV. And I'm going to call this one DTV, even it's really low. These are really low here. I probably will exclude them as well, since I don't have too many frequencies I have to get. And now I've got a scan that I've imported, and I've adjusted my TV stations to work for this particular scan. And I can start adding frequencies and do that. And we'll do that a little bit later. Let's see what happens. Now this particular scan from a TTI, let's look at the import scan file here. So the file that I imported when I go to import were these files here, and they were on my desktop. So I'm going to go back out and go to the files. Where am I looking for? It's not there. Open up the files. Come on, computer, you can do it. Oh, it's way over here. And here's my desktop. And here's my scan. New York scans inside. And if I look at one of these, I see that it's got the text in it. So I can open that, double click on it, and open it in an Excel spreadsheet and see that it's got the text. Now this file does load fine into IAS with the text in it. But if I wanted to use this file in Wireless Workbench, it wants to be just the numbers. So what I want to do, I could easily just select these and delete those and save this file, and I'd be done. But I've done my scans in 60 megahertz chunks, so I'd have to do that with 6 different files or 7 different files. So let me close this here, and we'll look at a way to get around that for loading this into Workbench. So here's the CSV files for the UHF and VHF section. And I'm going to use a little program called text file merging tool. And here I'm going to browse my folders and find that same folder on the desktop. And it shows I'm already there because I did this before we started the show. And I just select the folder that has those text files in it. And I say combine files. And then I save it. I call it all CSV in the same folder. It's the same folder as I had found the files in originally. So now I have a file called all CSV in that file, and it is all the files below. And if I take that same file look, let me make this window a little smaller here, and scan down it, you'll see the files as I go by with all the different text files in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up that the program I was using was Microsoft Excel 2011 or something. So I'm going to go to a current version of Excel. And I'm going to import a text file which does a conversion. So here's a file, here's a text file of a macro from my website, remove comments. And I notice it does have a little bit of a bug in it right now, but it will demonstrate most of the effects that you want. So I'm going to copy all of this here, copy it, and I'm going to close it. Now I want to put that into Excel. So I'm going to go back to the Excel sheet, and I'm going to go up to Tools, Macros, and I'm going to start it. Now, in the macros section, you can store your files in your personal file, which means it shows up every single time you open up Excel. I'm going to record a macro to demonstrate loading this in. So I'm going to cancel out of this. So I'm going to, if you haven't put it into there, you could go directly into the macro window and find the right place to put the macro and paste it in. But it's a little easier to do that by tricking the program. Let me go to macro, record new macro in the personal workbook, and I'm going to call it macro 1, and I'm going to say okay, and I'm going to do one thing on the screen right here, anything, then go back to macro, macro here, and stop recording. Now I'm going to go into the macros, and I have that macro 1 here. Now I can't edit it because I could unhide the personal macro page and edit it, but I can step into it. So I'm going to step into it, which allows me to look at it without actually editing the thing. It thinks it's running the program here. So I can scan through all the macros that are stored in here, and I can find a place where I want to put this. So I'm going to, let's say, I'm going to put this macro up here. I'm going to put it right in here, I think. Actually, you know, the one we did before ended up in module tool. So this is the one we just recorded, macro 1. So I'm going to select the whole thing. I'm going to paste that macro, which we copied from before, in there, and it's telling me that my virtual basic editor will stop its debug mode. I'm going to say okay. So now I pasted my macro in there, the remove comments macro, and I'm going to go just, I notice I also have it in module 2. Where is it here? I'm going to remove this one here. So we don't get 2 macros with the same name. Now I put this macro in there. So if you download macros from my website, they're just in text form. And this is a sort of an awkward way of importing it into Excel. You can make your own macro at any time just by recording a macro and do all the things you would normally do on an Excel spreadsheet, and then save it, and every time you run that macro, it will do all those things again on the spreadsheet. So I'm going to close this here. Now if I look in macros here, I've got remove TTI comments macro right there. So I'm going to go to the, I'm going to open that CSV file that we had before, the all one here. And there it is in the Excel. And I'm going to run the macro, remove TTI comments, and it does it, saves it, and exits the program. So I can go back in and look at this all file. And there's my file without all the text. So I can then load this into Wireless Workbench the bug I was talking about is if you go all the way down to the bottom of the screen, there's a few lines of text which I did not account for. So I'm just going to manually take those out. And I'm going to go to save this. I'm going to save it as the normal CSV file. And I'm going to close this. Now let's open up Wireless Workbench. If I can find it in my maze of programs here, it should be right next to here. There we go, right next to IAS, of course. I think I just uploaded a new version of it, so it's the first time I've started it. Yes, you can access my documents. Just talk among yourselves while this is starting here. So here in scan files, in the frequency coordination tab, you can upload, you can add your scans. This is where your scan files for doing a scan on Shure equipment would show up, but I can actually upload a file here. And I'm gonna go back to my desktop, go back to my folder here, to the all file, and I've loaded in this scan. So here's the scan that I've got now in Wireless Workbench. Let's see what happens if I try to load in one of the other files that we did not convert, like this file right here, which has the text in it still. I say open and I get an error, cannot be opened. It may be corrupted or wrong type of file. Well, all it has in its only corruption is it has text in it. So that's how you convert a file using a macro. Now, there's one other thing, one other macro I want to show you that's useful, particularly when you're doing intermod and doing IAS calculations. So let's go back to our IAS screen here. And let's open up a show that I already have in here, not save this scan here. This was the show in Las Vegas. And as you can see in the spectrum between 14 and channel 37, a lot of it has been moved down here. There's hardly anything left in this in here to do shows in. So we just have this spectrum up here, which is basically 36, 5, 4, 3, and also 31 and 30. And when I hover my cursor over these things, it's telling me right down here what channel I'm in. It's also telling me the level of the signal level, minus 81 dB, of the scan that's in there. So as I run my cursor up here, now it's minus 55, minus 62. So if I want to print this out, I can set my print to be a master list report and do a print command. And it basically prints into a browser. This mode, this particular display of the way it's printed out can be loaded into Excel really easily. Just copy it all, copy, go to my Excel spreadsheet, make a new spreadsheet, and paste it in, Control V.
Sorry, I don't have a phone number for Karthik K&V.
Yeah,
Who would you like to call?
Siri, I don't need you right now. Go away.
Okay.
Siri is always interrupting my conversations. Anyway, so here's the file loaded in with the information I'm really interested in being in particular columns. So I could go through and delete this, delete these rows here, delete sheet rows, and I could then delete this down here, delete sheet rows, and now I have all these nice columns with the data from IAS, name, model, the interval between the frequencies, channel, zone, etc., all this stuff. But that's doing that day after day after day is too much work. So what I came up with is a way to do a macro for that. So I'm going to delete this here. We're going to go back to this screen here, and we're going to Control A, and we're going to copy it. And then I'm going to go into this macro right here, export IAS, and I'm going to just run it. It takes the copied information, does all the stuff to it, and sticks it in here. Gets rid of some of the items, formats it right. So now my frequencies are all three digits. And so I can go through this and use this as in an Excel spreadsheet to sort and use in different ways. So here it's sorted by the name of the mic, whereas in IAS it only sorts by the frequency. So if your frequencies are all out of order, like here in this, the names of the names are all out of order. I can't sort by anything but the frequency. So that's basically the advantages of using macros. Now, that being said, I have always assumed in my website that people will give me files and I'll post them on there. And when somebody comes in, whatever format the file is in that's posted, they'll have to take it upon themselves to convert it to the different files they needed. Other scanned websites, like rfscans.com from PST, have that capability built into the download. So he's already created download files in the formats that people normally use, CSV and the others. So when you go to his website, you can download them in the format you want, already converted. Couple of questions. Matt Bonrek says, Bronyek, sorry if I screwed up your name. Is mostly everything DTV now instead of analog? Well, in the United States, mostly yes. I do still see a couple of analog stations on the Canadian border, but they may be gone by now, but for a while they were used there when you're doing shows in Buffalo and stuff like that. So does it matter in IAS, the difference between analog and digital? Well, there's when we were doing analog, there is a section in IAS that deals with that. So here's the scan I was doing before, or the display of what I was doing before, and I'm gonna make it bigger so you can see it. So there we go. So up here in the top, there's a button called Options. If I click on that button in Options, I see a bunch of different things. One, the main thing I deal with is this test enable section. So when I'm doing my coordination for in-ears, which go through combiners, which are susceptible to
Yeah, Pete, we're not seeing that. You need to share your whole desktop, not the app.
I'm not doing anything. Oh yeah, I am. This is the Windows. You're right. Totally forgot the deficiencies of Windows on this machine. So now you've got option screen open, and this section right in here, thirds, third TX, fifths, active spectrum, is what I use to adjust how I'm computing the intermods. So if I'm doing, let's start from ground zero here on this thing. Let's get rid of this section right here. Remove the assignment, start from the empty thing. So I'm going to start coordinating. First thing I want to put in is my in-ears. So I'm going to go and select Shure PSM 1000. And I can look on my chart down here on the bottom and see the bars that show me what bands are available in the PSM 1000. So I have the G10, 8H, J8. Well, obviously I can't use G10s here in Nevada, but I can use the J. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to select a J8 channel, and I'm going to search from range here in options because I'm doing a search for in-ear monitors. I want to check for triple beats, which are usually only created in active electronics, and particularly with combiners. So here we have, I'm now going to go ahead and calculate, and it's going to find me all the frequencies in J8 that work with triple beats in third and fifth. And you see there's 265,000 calculations. Now I can take these and use these. Now down here in my chart, I see that, okay, I've got these two bands open and I have these here. So this is channel 30 and 31. So I'm going to put all of my in-ears in 30 and 31. And when I'm calculating intermods for ears, if I have 5 ears, I'll pick 10 frequencies. Because once you add all your microphones and everything into the coordination, they're going to be taken into account in the intermod, and you won't be able to find any more triple beat wireless frequencies. They'll just won't be there anymore. You'll have to start from ground zero. So I want to pick as many of the really hard to find frequencies as I start my coordination. So now I've found pretty much everyone that I can fit into this section down here. And if I wanted to quickly look at this to see how it fits, I can do the same print preview command I did before for exporting. And when you print preview, it will export them and show me what channels I've used. That channel information, I see it and I see my frequencies in order. If I want to see them individually here, I can select this particular channel and double click on it. Actually, I don't even have to double click on it. I can see the TV channel. I just have to select it and I see the TV channel right up here in the top. So here's one in 31, 31, 30, and the rest are 30. So then I would just, to prevent future frequencies I pick out of the list, I'm going to call these ears. And now I'm going to pick a bunch of wireless mics. Now all my ears are right down here in 30 and 31. So I'm going to put the mics up higher. So I'm going to unzoom this. I'm going to zoom back in. Let me turn this off here and you can see something here. If I select a generic, it gets rid of all the suggested bands, and I'm going to clear this. Now, When I clear the candidate list, all the little red jumps down on the bottom will go away. But you see in my scan that I put in for this, I scanned beyond channel 37. And this green was a suggested channel from the FCC, but this C is the cellular block for T-Mobile. And so I turned on that. I'm not going to put any wireless up there at this point. I could, but this, when I turned on this cellular, it also automatically turned on. This is a signal coming from the tower, and this is where the signal coming from the cell phone would show up. So it basically blocked both of those out. So if I did frequencies up there, this turning these on would keep IAS from picking frequencies in that area. So back to our original plan here. I'm going to zoom in on up through 37. Now I want to put some wireless mics up here. And I'm going to go to Shure. I'm going to pick Accent Digital, mostly because it's one of the few wireless devices available that covers the entire band. RAD is the same way. The RAD wireless covers the entire band. So here I know that I want to put my frequency starting at channel 33. So now I because this is not an in-ear situation, I'm not going to bother doing triple beats. So I turn this off. Oh, you know, about an hour ago, I was answering a question about digital and analog in IAS. This section here has to do with the analog TV stations, how to calculate my frequencies. When we had analog, we actually could stick wireless mics in the middle of an analog TV station because it consisted of 3 different carriers and there was space to do that if you really, really, really had to do it. And clicking on this tests the color carrier. Having numbers in the boxes tests the for intermod, but in reality, we're not using any analog. So I could possibly get a couple more frequencies in there if by just zeroing these out, but I don't bother doing that. One thing I do is I usually try to limit my intermod to 40 megahertz maximum distance between my frequency and the intermod, which cuts down on the total number of intermod calculations it's doing. And if they're that far away, they're gonna be so far down, so low level that it's not gonna make any difference. Up here on the top right, the intermod spacing for UHF. So here it's gonna say that it has a different spacing depending on the intermod product you're trying to avoid. As you go further and further away from the main frequency, the intermod product gets lower and lower and lower and lower. So I can squeeze in frequencies closer to it than right at the main frequency, which is full power. So these are the distances for that intermod. Now, this one thing, avoid sevenths, that had never been implemented in IAS. It was in the original design. I think they realized nobody can be bothered by 7th order intermod. Down here is my default bandwidth. If I turn off all of these checkboxes, turn them all off, it's at least going to keep my frequencies 300 kilohertz apart. And this is where if I wanted to put in some ear packs that are spaced further apart, I would increase this number. So here I'm going to do some mics over here. I'm going to add mics over here. So I turned off triple beat. Now I'm going to calculate with the Shure Accent Digital. And it picked a whole bunch down in this section here and a bunch up here. But remember, I only want my mics to be channel 33 and above. So I'm going to look on the chart here. and see where the mics are. And here I'm going to go backwards down from the top and pick my bunch of mics here. And sometimes if I'm doing a show which has very few RF devices, I will start out by picking them every other available frequency just to get them a little bit further away. But there's no reason why they can't be stacked right next to each other. They're already appropriately spaced by IAS. So I'm going to move those selected items. Now I have mics down here. So then I can go through these lists here and I can name these. I can either click once here and say EAR1 and apply it, or I find it's a little easier to just double click. It automatically is ready to put the name in EAR2 and hit enter. So I name them all, and then when I make a change later on in the frequency, like let's say I want to change this particular frequency here, it's going to change the frequency, but the label will stay the same. So I'll know where it is. So if I was doing a tour, and this was the tour list here, when I went into a new city, I would load in the new scans for the city. I would select the DTV station, make sure they're all right, and then I would just press recalculate, or I would go up here to zone 1, right click, and recalculate the whole zone, and it would go through and pick all new frequencies for me. And I think if I do it now, it won't do anything because I picked appropriately good frequencies. But if I turn on this DTV station here, which has a couple of ears in it, I'm going to recalculate the zone, and now it has replaced this one, and it's yellow. So if I right click on that one and I go down to set 624.32, these are the options: normal, frequency change, manually accepted, and not coordinated. So if I tried to get more frequencies for this area, let's say I right clicked on this and I tried to do a range search for this, it found all these frequencies, but I got to remember my options are set for no triple beats. So it's actually calculating, it's doing a range search for these, but with these options up here. Turn on the triple beats and clear this. Now I'm going to do the same thing here, do a range search for those. And it's not going to find any because it's doing the triple beats now. Well, you know where it found them? It found them, it found them in the channels that I don't want to be in, because these want to be in channel 30 and 31. So it's fitting them into the other channels, which are up here, which that band, that J5 band, still works in. So as my come on, go away. So it found more frequencies, but outside the band plan. So I have to, I say, oh, there's nothing I can do there. Well, what if you really, 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 really had to add another in-ear there? I probably would, as long as I had plenty of time to test it myself, I would probably go ahead and either put one in the band with the mics, checking to see that it was reasonably far away. Let's say I picked this one right here, which is in channel 39. I'm going to put it over into here, into the ear section. Now I'm going to do a print preview. and I see that here are my ears, and here are my mics, and here's that one ear that I stuck in down in this band here, and it's 5 meg away from the closest frequency, 615 to 620. So I can live with this being way up there. So I try to start out with band planning, put things in one area because it minimizes the problems in the end. But in reality, since you're doing intermod on everything in one zone, it's all together. Even if I intermixed all these, I probably wouldn't have much of a problem until I happen to have a monitor engineer who runs his console at +10 and is occasionally, I can't say they do it all the time, but occasionally overdriving the in-ear packs, in-ear transmitters, which are then splattering much wider than they normally would, which would get into the mics. And the whole reason to keep these in a separate area is so when they splatter or they overdrive the transmitter, it's only going to affect the transmission of adjacent ear packs and not the receivers, which are much more sensitive to garbage RF in the area. So there was a couple more questions here. Mark says, couple of questions. With TTI Series 5 with option U2, you're using scan mode where I can make a CSV file that works straight to IIS and WWB. I'm not entirely sure it works in WWB, but I'll have to test that. You can scan the full spectrum, but there's a limited number of scan points done in a TTI. You can't adjust the number of actually scan points it's doing. So when you scan the entire spectrum, it's very low resolution. I'm going to take this, I'm going to do a scan on my TTI here with the span, frequency span, frequency center, start at 500 and end at, I'll get you a picture of this in a second here. Come on, center, span. Okay, so here, this is a 150 megahertz scan. That's 150 megahertz scan, and there's not nearly enough detail in it. It's hard to tell what's happening in between these. So that's why I like to break it down into a 60 megahertz scan and see more detail. On the Field Fox, you can set the number of scan points. So I can set it to be 1,000 scan points all the way across, but I still like to do even 60 megahertz on this. Christopher says, do you see it being possible to do 80 channels of wireless, 40 channels Wizicom IEM, the 50 channel Sennheiser on a tour after the repack? Two things. First of all, clearly it would be easier if you're indoors, if you have some sort of protection. And secondly, depending on where you are, there are still parts of the country that are not totally filled up with UHF and VHF. So you might be able to do it. Now, the thing about Wizicom IEMs, they have virtually no intermod products. The one particular model I'm thinking of, and we'll see that in a show we're doing in a day or so, or this afternoon with about Wizicom. But So I'd be much. I would have less. I would tend to put my intermod calculations on less of a stringent thing. I might even just do third order instead of triple beat to fit them in. Sennheiser 6000, similar to Axion Digital, definitely can be used if you absolutely have to do it and you have the proper license on a weak DTV station. So you may be able to get away with that on a tour. But again, it's always problematic. WWB, we can see even adjust the exclusion threshold. Well, there is no exclusion threshold. That on the exclusion threshold, as you move it up and down a WWB, it adds or subtracts channels to your spectrum to include or not include them. Here in IAS, we are just manually selecting the channels to exclude or not include. So if I were doing a coordination and I could have, when I was doing this intermod here, when I was doing this calculation, I could have turned off, I could have set these 4 channels to be DTV, artificially telling IAS, when you do your PSM 1000 calculations, only put them in here. And then when I'm done, I would turn these off and then turn these on, and then I would do my Axion Digital, and they would only show up here. So you can, but it was obviously with this few devices, it was easier to do it just by looking at the channel setting. Yeah, the John, the bug on the TTA macro, I just pointed out. It has a little bit of text in the bottom which you have to delete. And if I did a lot smarter VBA programming, that wouldn't be done. I'm going to work on that. Christopher says, if you've run out of space and have to have in-ear mics in the same channel, what's the minimum spacing? Well, like I said before, the 300 kilohertz is probably okay, as long as you're not overdriving your in-ear monitors. If you want to be sure, when you select your in-ear monitors here, select them. Let's like, if I get rid of these mics here, I don't want to export. I want to just get rid of them. Remove assignment. So here I'm going to remove these ears, and I'm going to go up here to options. And if I want to select my in-ears, I'm going to make the in-ears 399. So 400 kilohertz bandwidth spacing. So now I'm going to accept that, and I'm going to go up to the Shure PSM 1000s again. And I'm going to do a J8 frequency band again. And I'm going to do a calculate in range, and I'm going to get less frequencies out in the 30 and 31 band. So here I got 4. No, I got about the same, but now they're 400 kilohertz apart. So I've spaced them a little bit further, and let's say I can't band plan. Let me take a few of these out here and just import a few of them, those selected items. So these are going to be my ears. And then I'm going to go up to options here and put my default bandwidth back to 299. And I'm going to do my spacing of the mics And I'm going to do a calculation on the mics. And here in 30 and 31, so if I pick these mics in 30 and 31, so now these are intermixed. And I do a print preview. So here I've got an ear, which is 1.4 meg. I've got the mic here, which is now showing 350. These spacings are between this one and this one is 1.1, between this and 1.4, between the ear and the mic is only showing 350. So what I was just showing you does not space it when I go to do when I go to stick the mics in after the fact. So I'd have to have that spacing, I'd have to leave the mics and the ears at the new 0.399 setting to get that spacing in all of them. I think before I stuck ears, mics in the same channel as your in-ear monitors, I tried to, if they're, let's say, Axient Digital, I try to put them on a channel which is not receivable inside the venue, like a weekly TV channel, move them over there. But again, if you had to put them in there, I'd walk test them, make sure they all worked, and I'd be doubly sure that the monitor mixer is not overdriving them to the extent that I probably would watch it and actually turn the level down if I saw him pushing too hard. Not by much, 2 or 3 dB. Roger Gonzalez says, how would you break your scans with tools like RF Explorer, filtering quality of electrons not aligned with TTI and higher end scanners? I assume you mean how would I break them up when I do my scans? I would still do 60 megahertz scans. The RF Explorer actually does as good a scan as TTI, particularly if you look at it with the computer software. You can't tell anything from that little screen on the front. I don't even know why the screen is there. But it does. But for finding TV stations, it's perfectly acceptable. In the air, intermod causes when you have a transmitter, two different transmitters walking around and getting close to each other. And you typically will find it also at the RF A2 desk when mics are not in tins, they're just sitting loose on the desk and they're turned on, and you walk up close to them with your spectrum analyzer and the whole spectrum turns to garbage. I mean, it's just nothing but intermod there. You walk 10 feet away, all that intermod goes away. So unless you're actors, Kenneth Goodwin is saying, how do you use IAS to look for transmitter third and fifth order intermod? For example, when an actor is double mic'd but walking through other chorus members. Well, the important thing is they're not near the receiver. If they're double mic'd and walking through chorus members and they're standing right next to a receiver antenna, you might have an issue. If the antenna is 10 feet away from the closest performance area, you probably won't have an issue. Again, test it when you're doing your war game. Put all the double mic transmitters 1 foot apart, or you don't want to put them right next to you, but appropriately spaced, like on either side of their body, and test to see if as you war game them, if there anything is showing on the other units. Put them in put the transmitters in the situation you expect to be using them and test them like that.
Hey, Pete, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second here.
Yeah,
I
go
saw
ahead.
we had a few people joining us. I had a little programming issue with the webinar platform. So if you joined us at noon Central, thinking we were starting at the top like the thing showed a few weeks ago, we didn't. We started at noon Eastern. So do me a favor and just in the questions area, if you joined at around that noon, 1 p.m. Eastern, throw in there that you joined us, and we're going to go back and cover macros and that stuff we did at the front where you've come in. We're basically just, working in our, Pete is doing his freeform half pipe performance right now. So we're taking questions from the floor. So if you joined us late, not late, but what appeared to be on time, go ahead and do that. So yes, Kevin, I see your note. Excellent. We'll spin back around and pick up on macros and that topic. So thanks, Pete, for letting me interrupt and keep on
Not a
going
problem.
on.
Not a problem.
I'm going to pay you OT today. All right.
I get paid? Oh,
Yeah, you
that's
should bill
news.
for OT. Yes.
Okay, okay. No problem. One of the other things that I wanted to point out was that when you have a coordination with frequencies already selected and you have to get a new frequency, there's a couple of different options. I'm going to clear out this side here. And let's say I had another zone. I'm going to go to zone and add a zone and set it as active. So let's say I'm doing a show back in the olden days with telex BTRs, and I had a bunch of BTRs I had to put on the show. And typically I would include the BTRs in my transmit calculations, but I would put the receive side down in the zone 2. Well, I can't put BTRs down in that zone, or maybe I can. Let's go here, telex, BTR 100, 800, and let's say I have an ETX, so we'll pick some E. And want to do it with triple beat like that because it's part of the combiner. And we do calculate, and it finds a few, so we're going to put those down here. Now, this second zone is in another room. Let's say it's 150 feet away from my first theater, which is in zone 1. So I have done some transmission things here, which are spaced only from these mics. They're doing intermod amongst themselves, this section right here, but it's not doing intermod here. Now, if I'm in the process of doing the show, I'm going to save this before I forget that I have it. In the process of doing the show, I may decide I have to change a frequency. Well, one way to do it is you can set the zone. Let's say I can set the zone to active, then go up here to the mics, the Shure mics, and I can then do a range search and find all the frequencies that'll work in that zone. Takes a little while because it is searching the entire spectrum. So here's all the frequencies that I go through, and I can pick out one that works where I want to put it. But I can shorten that step a little tiny bit by, let's say I had a big calculation and this was my active zone and I wanted to change one frequency right here. I can do a range search that's set for the intermod calculations in zone 1, even though zone 1 is not an active zone. I've right-clicked on a mic, on an ear or a mic in that zone, and the act of doing a range search with the right click is going to take into account these calculations. Now, one thing I don't know if it does, and I'm guessing it doesn't do, is I just did a range search for an ear pack without setting triple beats. Oh, they were set. Okay, amazing. I didn't think I'd get that many. But if this is set differently, and I did a range search for let's say if I said here, turn this off, and I did a range search for PSM 1000s again, see, it's not doing triple beat calculations now. So even when I do the search here, it's always affected by how the options are set. Now, if you've done a whole bunch of calculations on this, and you've done your entire coordination for your whole show, and you come to a new theater, set your new frequencies in, and do a recalculate, IAS is going to recalculate them in the best order to get the best process. So it's going to, since these were done with triple beats on, it's going to redo those with triple beats on automatically in the recalculate. It's going to do these with triple beats off. If I had some wireless mics on here that are of the older crystal controlled type that maybe only have 1 or 2 frequencies that it can be set to, it will try to calculate those first before everybody else. Just pick one of those and start everything else around it. So it's going to calculate your entire list in a relatively intelligent way. The other things you can do by right clicking is, let's say I just want to find a frequency right now, and I've already labeled this. So this is going to be ear 2. I can right click, and if I just do a recalculate for 567.5, it's nothing's going to change because this calculation is correct. It's the intermod is not, it's done a correct intermod. But I'm going to right click and force it to find a frequency other than 567.5. And here it's found 567.55. But if I'd had an entire pile of frequencies in here, I'd want to know where I was going to change it. Now, what I usually do, I'm going to undo this. What I usually do on a show, if I'm changing a mic, I will go here and I will label this ear 2 567.5. So I know what it was before. Come on. Apply. So now when I do the change and I recalculate a new frequency for that, force recalculate, it's done a new frequency. Now I can walk up to the transmitter and look for this frequency. So this is the frequency it's currently set at, and this is the frequency I want to move it to. So I'll have a reference. If I don't put this in the title, I can walk up to the rack and say, I don't remember which one this is supposed to be for. So, but if you in a live show, you want to make sure you're not changing something that could be in use or doesn't need to be changed. So putting the name of the old frequency in the name field helps me. We can go a little, if there are any other questions on IAS, Michael Mason says, you may want to mention, and I will right now, that most intermod is in the receiver and the gain structure of RX antenna and distribution to the receiver. And if that's so, I have to pull this down so I can see the rest of the question here. You should have your spectrum analyzer looking at the actual DA you're using to feed your mics. So years ago, I was hired to go into a network and find out why their antenna system was not covering very well. And I went in, and in the afternoon show, I just plopped my spectrum analyzer on the table and put the antenna on it and watched the whole show, and it worked fine. Everything looked fine. We come back the next day for the second show, and that day I plugged my antenna into the TV station's antenna system, and I'd arrived early, and all of a sudden the lights in the studio go on, and my spectrum analyzer fills up with noise. And I just sort of yelled, "Turn off the lights, I want to see something." And they turned lights off, and bingo, it went away. And we discovered that one of the receive antennas was 1 foot away from an LED control box that was spewing all kinds of RF out. We moved that receive antenna 10 feet away from that box. All the noise went away, and it was all fine. But the moral of the story is I was looking through their antenna system on my spectrum analyzer on the second day, but not on the first day. So I slapped my hand and we continued on. Okay, Kevin. 1 antenna up and 1 antenna down. What was that in response to?
Is that for dual packs or?
Oh, yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
I don't
That
know if
makes sense.
for sure, but that seems maybe.
That makes sense. If you're putting 2 packs on a person, there's a couple of things you can do to help intermod issues between those 2 packs. One, you can put 1 pack horizontal on their belt and the other pack vertical. So the antennas are 90 degrees out of phase. But you can also put 1 antenna up, 1 antenna down. I suppose because the antennas are sort of out of polarity with each other. But what I usually do is try to do 1 horizontal, one vertical. Henry points out that the intermod doesn't occur in the air, which is what I said. But when you have transmitters too close together, they are their antennas are receiving the other transmitted signal. Mixing occurs in the final PA of the transmitter. That's why the WYSICOM packs are so good. They have much better filters built into them. There's a demonstration that I saw them do at AES or NAB, I guess, where they held 2 wireless mic transmitters with the antennas touching. And there was no visible intermod. You couldn't even see it on the spectrum analyzer because it wasn't getting into the other transmitter. Craig Dorman asked about using left hand versus right hand helicals. I think it won't allow any closer spacing of your frequencies, but you might be able to put the antennas a little closer together than you would normally want them. I like to keep receive antennas on either side of the stage, even if it means running a long line to the other side of the stage. So at least half the time I'm close to over half the locations the mic might be. And then I like to put the transmitter antenna at least 10 or 15 feet away from any receive antenna, possibly further upstage. So there's plenty of spacing in between them. So I'm going to go back and do a quick little RF, a quick little demo of removing the text from a scan. So if we have a scan which looks like this here, we're going to go back to Excel, and we're going to open a CSV file like this one right here. This is a scan from a TTI, and it comes in with a bunch of text built into it. And the text doesn't really bother loading into a TTI because it's designed specifically to accept it. If I did a scan from a Shure piece of hardware, it has different text in it, and it will not load in to IAS without a little bit of editing. If I did a scan with Sennheiser, it comes in a totally different way, different format. So those all have to be modified to load into IAS. In this particular case, if I took the scan and I combined it with all the rest of the scans in that same file, I'm going to browse to the folder that has my 60 megahertz scans in it. And it's still in the same place as it was because it remembers where it was. So here's some scans I did at Metropolitan Studios. And I'm going to go to the outside scan. I'm going to point there, and then I'm just say combine all the files. It combines them and then asks me where I want to save it. And I saved it as all up here. So I can save it again as all, save. Now when I go back and I look at the all, it's going to look just like it did before, but it's going to still have the text in the middle of it. So if I want to get rid of that text, I could edit it out in the Excel spreadsheet, but I could just load it in with, I could load it into Office Excel app. And I could use a macro on it. So here's a macro, here's the macro section in Excel. And this is the program remove TTI comments. I'm going to go back to my original. So if I go to my website and I download this Excel from the website, I have it here on my desktop, and I open this up, you're going to see the file as it was in the download. So this is just a plain old text file. And I'm going to select all and copy. Now I'm going to get it into Excel. How do I get that into Excel? If I go into the macro screen here, I could go into edit mode. Now, if I click on edit, it won't let me edit this file here because that's a hidden file. But if I go into edit mode, okay, like these are only these files are stored in the personal file, and I can go up to Excel and unhide them. But a little trick is I can step into the file and paste in here. I'm going to remove this because we had pasted it in before. It's going to say, oh, you're not doing your debug anymore. So it's going to end the debug session. So now I have an empty section here, and I'm just going to paste in that text file. So now I've got the file pasted in, and it's in the macro section here. I've loaded my file that still has the text on it, the text in it. And now I'm going to macro, and I'm going to do remove the TTI comments, and I'm going to run it. And it does it and saves it and closes the file. I can go back into that Excel spreadsheet, and look at it, and all the text had been removed, except possibly for a little bunch at the bottom, which my macro has a bug in it, doesn't really take all of it out. I have to work on that, and here I can just delete that. So now this file, when I save it as a CSV file, will load into Workbench without any errors. Now, even with the text files in it, it will load into IAS without errors because it's expecting those files. So typically what I would do to load IAS is here's the spectrum down here on the bottom, and here's the scan that was loaded in. I can load in the scan that we just did there. I'm going to go here to the edit screen to import data, clear the data that's in there, and go back here to home and set this to general. So we get rid of the Axient digital thing. I'm going to go back to edit, import scan data, import RF sweep data. And here's that all file we just edited. I'm going to load that, and it goes to this screen first, which allows me to enter information about the screen, where it was taken, the date, etc. And if I save that, it will, if I do that, it will record it in the Professional Wireless IAS database and offer it to other people that happen to be in the same location when they come on. But if I just say, okay, it doesn't do that. Now it's loaded that file in here. And I can go through and I can select channels to mark as DTV or not. Now this is a different scan from a different location than the Gulfstream show. So that's why it looks different. The one from Las Vegas had a lot of stuff down here. As I said before, there are, on my website, people give me scans and I put them on the website and I post them up, and I expect if somebody wants to come to the website and get the scan, that's fine. But it's up to them to find a conversion method that will put it into their spectrum analyzer or their IAS program. So here's all the files in my website and where they all come from. This is a map here. I'll scan out to the world here. Come on. So here we've got scans pretty much all over the world, except probably Africa and Russia. Just got a couple of new scans from Australia, from Al Craig, although they are a little bit old. But if you click on any of these scans here, you can then see what the stadium is, date of the scan. This is Ike's, and you can click on it and go to a close-up map of where the show actually happened. And if you happen to be doing a show in that part of the country, but you're not actually in that stadium, well, you can pick this scan, and the scans will probably be valid across the river here. But there are other websites. One in particular is called rfscans.com, and it has macros built into it or conversions built into it. So when you look at a scan data for a particular location, it comes in a CSV version or in a Workbench version or in a WSM version, all three of them. So these, Patsy has done a terrific job in putting that website together and done all the macro changes for you. So I think TTI 2702. Lucas says he has the TTI 2702. Not possible to change the RBW. Well, I don't have a 22 in front of me, but my 3605, you can. I'm going to just go to that here. I just have to put my control panel back on the screen here. So here's the TTI. And if you go to sweep bandwidth, there's RBW, RBW set, VBW, and VDBW set. If I go to RBW set, I then can choose from this menu of all the different settings. So I can go, let's say, to 10 megahertz instead of 300 megahertz. So that changed the resolution. Or I can just put it in auto mode, and now it's automatically setting, and it chooses 10 megahertz. Or maybe RBW, so you go here, 300 megahertz. Oh, RBW is over here. So RBW is 300 megahertz, VBW is 10 megahertz, because VBW is set for the 10 meg, and RBW is set for 300. So you can change it, but I can't say for sure that the menu in the 2702 reacts the same way. John Christie points out that a left hand helical and a right hand reduces the amount of inner monitor TX that ever gets into your mic RX. So it's basically the left hand transmit antenna and the right hand transmit antenna are basically out of phase. So they cannot receive each other. So he uses that to keep his transmits out of his transmit. So he says he at least gets 20 dB isolation between the two different antennas. And if you figure, if you let the difference between left hand and right hand, if you take your hand and point your thumb in the direction of the cone of the antenna, if the direction the wraps are going follows your hand, it's right-handed. If the direction here follows your hand, it's left-handed direction. Now, this doesn't matter whether you point into the front of the antenna or the back of the antenna. It's going to be the same thing. You're basically, I'm pointing to the back antenna here. I'm pointing to the front of the antenna here. So the direction where the wrap is going determines that. So Kelly, you want to invite our guests in, and they can add anything they'd like to?
Yeah, let's bring on some of our teams. We got some folks from PWS with us today available, because we knew we had some leftover questions from our IES session. And Ike Zimble, obviously, shouldn't say obviously, he'll be joining us as well. He's from the other side of the border. I joke with Ike a lot of times. He'll be providing our Canadian real-time translation. And it's good to see you again, Ike. So, as we get these topics, some of this is very much about, free form here. So, folks
So
that,
Kelly, could I just
Cody,
step in
Gary,
for,
Ike,
Kelly, could I just
jump on
step
in.
for a second? Yeah, so when Kelly just said some of this is very much about something, up here, that would be, this is very much a boot something. So,
Oh, that's right. It's a boot.
yeah,
That's right.
okay.
Thank you
All
for
right,
that translation.
Back to the RF thing, yeah.
It's a boot something, eh?
Yeah, it's a boot something A.
Don't understand what you're talking about. Is that something to do with the trunk of a car or something? I don't know.
Now that's English to English translation.
Ah, okay, okay. Well, there should be an app for that.
All right, well, back to RF.
Yeah. I'll go.
Hey, Pete, someone had that question on the 2702, and I just pulled mine out. You can't, you have three choices next to the frequency span button. You can, there's a sweep slash BW,
Yeah,
and then the
sweep
next
is the
one.
one you use, right?
Yeah, and then the line below that is RBW, and then it gives you auto, 15 kilohertz, 280 kilohertz, and 1 megahertz. Those are your only options on the 27.
But it is settable, right? Or you
Yeah,
have, it's less of an options than on this
less
unit here. So,
options.
right, this is giving me, if I go to set, this is giving me RBW set, giving me about 10 different options from 30 hertz up to 100 kilohertz. So it's a different quantity, but you can do a set. John Sulek points out the same thing, that RBW setting works on his 2702.
I got a couple of things to point out. Moving on from that, if anybody's been looking at Pete's graph and wondering why it looks different from their IAS graph, Pete, it looks like you've customized the colors for what your, what a DTV channel looks like and what an exclusion zone looks like and so on. Correct?
Right. I just, when you're doing RF and intercom, you end up an awful lot of spare time on your hands. And once everything's all working, particularly if you're doing a good job. And so in the options tab, there's a graph options tab in that tab. I have to go to full screen here. So here's my options tab, and here's the graph options. Here's I can set all the colors for the screen and this display. I can reset to the original defaults, and it puts it back to the pink and yellow that came with it.
Yeah.
Now it's going to take me an hour and a half to find all those green and red frequencies back again.
I was just going to say that takes a while to redo all those user settings there.
Exactly.
Sorry,
Exactly.
man. Which is another Canadian thing I have to do is say sorry occasionally. The other thing I thought people might be interested in is that when you do a range search for frequencies and some of them come up with a D next to them, that D means that it is inside a digital TV channel or just sort of at the edge of it.
Yeah.
You want to maybe touch on that a bit?
Well, here, let me see if I can coax a D out of this thing here. I can't really get one with this particular thing, but typically IAS will think that just because the signal goes down to 0, technically in between two DTV stations, you can stick something in there. And I suppose if you were really, really hurting for frequencies and you had a mic you had to put in there, you could squeeze it in the middle. I don't know if I would stick an ear in between two DTV, but when you look at
I've definitely done mic transmitters. I think IFBs. I can't remember, but sometimes you gotta. And if you zoom in on that area, there is typically about maybe at least a couple of 100 kilohertz between the two. Sometimes a bit more. But anyway, that's what you're seeing when those Ds pop up at the edge of a frequency or after a frequency.
What I usually do is when I'm selecting my frequencies, I just stay away from the ones with the D on them because I know it's going to be a problem. And I usually try to stay away from any frequency that's next to a D, because I know when I look on my spectrum analyzer, I'm going to see that DTV station popping up, maybe 300 or 400 kilohertz away from my mic, but I'd rather it not be there at all. And once in a blue moon, we have to wait for this to calculate because it's using the entire span. So here's all these Ds. So it's in between all these stations, which are all DTV stations. It's trying to stick a channel. So if you look here, you see all the little blue signs. I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit here. So here's all the DTV stations. In between each one, it's a frequency it's selected. So what I'll usually do if this was a scan and I would not choose this frequency. I'd start a little bit further away. I'd start choosing here, even though it's probably 700-800 kilohertz away. Or I could go ahead and choose this frequency, both of them in fact, send them in there and look at them in detail on my spectrum analyzer. Maybe it's a weak station and I'm putting an Axion digital there, then it's probably fine. Even though the DTV station skirt is still coming up from the middle of my frequency. It's not a big frequency, and I can get away with sticking a Axion digital sort of on the edge of it without any real problem.
Yeah, I think it really depends what you're doing. Like on sports gigs, like when you start to get into the hundreds of frequencies, I mean, I'm not above putting an ENG crew in an area like that. Typically on top of their own station if I can manage it, but you know, not above putting them in there because they're going to be 10 feet away from their camera with a, you know, a 250 milliwatt transmitter,
Yeah.
and they're probably going to do just fine. Cody, I have a question. If when it's calculating the D frequencies, is it calculating intermod? Because, for example, if you had one at 476 and one at 482 and one at 488, then if you used all three of those, then they would be thirds.
Yeah, it's supposed to be within that. So even if you do have that selected there on the thirds, it is supposed to be calculating for that.
So I guess it's shifting it slightly from they're not exactly 6 megahertz apart then.
Correct.
Cool.
And
Oh,
Pete,
you mean
one thing,
it's cheating? It's cheating and to avoid the thirds? Because I mean, obviously they're 6 megahertz apart, but you look at right here and they're not.
right? And that's just what it's basically modifying it for that spacing right there to be able to fit
Oh,
those
okay.
in.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And then the other thing I wanted to mention here too, real quick, you were talking about, since we're in the DTV portion of this, you were talking about the difference between the analog and the digital spacings. If you don't have any analog TV selected in your graph, that NTSC component spacing won't have any bearing on your coordination.
So if I set it to analog, set this one to analog, then it would take it.
Correct. Then
See, here's
those
the analog,
parameters
your
in the
carrier, here's your color carrier, right? Okay.
Yep. But if you don't have any of those in your graph or as a part of your coordination, then that NTSC component spacing window won't have any bearing on that coordination.
So you don't even have to worry about it, whether it's checked or not.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. And normally I do a little bit further apart. I don't bother checking this first one right here, spacing for third order. But in triple beat, because it's often so hard to find them, I allow them to be a little closer. Sometimes when I'm doing a small show, I do the entire chord with all three settings turned on, everything turned on. If I'm only doing, you know, 10, 20 mics and 10, 20 ears in a space with hardly any DTV, can't hurt to do it with them all on.
Stop it, Pete. You're making me nostalgic for the old days.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Really,
Although, you
man.
know, sometimes it works out well. I did years and years ago, I did a show for a rental company that had a lot of Sennheiser, and their Sennheiser was all in. They didn't really have clever names for their frequency. They were actually real frequency numbers for all their different bands. So the show required 80 handheld wireless microphones in a ballroom, one on each table. And it was in Lower Manhattan. And so in an effort to see if I could do it, I made sure I got as many different frequency bands from them as I possibly could. And I get down to the venue and I do a scan outside. It's New York, you know, you got lots of DTV. And I get inside the venue, and it turns out the ballroom is in the third basement down in the building. And I go in there and look at my spectrum analyzer. It's straight, flat scan across the bottom of the chart. There was nothing there. Couldn't receive anything. So that job was a piece of cake.
I found that a lot in a lot of stuff in Florida. A lot of the arenas and the venues in Florida, Miami area, you know, they're building those to withstand hurricanes, and miraculously that helps us with
Shields it
RF.
up. Yeah.
And a lot of those venues, you can do a lot of stuff. You can use a lot of the spectrum because as soon as you walk in the door, everything from the outside just disappears.
Yeah. Yep. And when I was on tour, I found Europe tends not to have very many people broadcasting over the air anyway. So almost every city we'd go in, there'd be like 2 stations on the air, and that would be it. So it became much easier to do the show there, except for a few places like Italy where it's the Wild West, and I don't think they even license stations. Anybody can broadcast there, and it's just like impossible.
Yeah, I've been in Europe the last couple of years, and there were a few times where I didn't even have to do a new coordination for a new city.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah, sure.
same, works. Maybe change one or two, but yeah, it's a little bit more civilized. Australia too, as Steve was saying last week, there's not a lot of UHF down
Yep.
there, and UHF TV, and that was pretty good. Except you have to know that they start at, I think, 520 is
Right.
where you can't tune below 520 when you're in Australia. So that's something you need to know as well.
One thing about touring with RF, enlist the help of your tour manager and make sure they know what you're doing, where you're going, what frequencies you're using, because they may be asked by local authorities, what are you doing for wireless mics? And the tour manager actually is responsible for getting licenses. Like if you're doing shows in England, you need to get permission to use certain bands, and it's the tour manager who would be doing all that. So keep them in the loop. Second part of that is if you're on a tour and the wireless, the walkie-talkies are being provided by some other rental company, and you're in a going through Europe, make sure that you, even though you are not coordinating frequencies, make sure that you know that the walkie-talkies have separate settings in them for each different country. So
Yep,
as you move from one country to another, you switch your walkie-talkies over to another profile.
Absolutely. On the tour I was on last year, the production managers were very on top of that, and the day sheet would say, tonight we're getting on the bus and we're going to Brussels, and tune your radio to zone 6, Brussels.
Before you go to sleep, before you get there, right?
Before you get into the venue or whatever. And
Yeah.
when they're on top of it, they're all over it. But the tour manager, very, very important people to know, because I've also been in places that had officially very restrictive, for example, power regulations for RF. And when you actually dig into it and talk to the tour manager talks to the promoter, and they go, yeah, we know about that. nobody does anything about it. Have a nice day, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
so I'm not saying what country that is or anything, but it's definitely a thing. And so yes, definitely, you really want to be in close communication with the tour managers. Also about managing the half a song or one song uh, local press grab at the top of the show, where they could come in and grab a little bit of, here's the opening act of, or here's the first number of the Taylor Swift show or
I mean, if
whatever.
they walk in with their wireless, right?
Exactly, what they walk in
Yep.
with their wireless, and they typically need to, know that you're monitoring it and know that they should be monitoring it, and maybe give you a liaison with the publicist or something to stay on top of it.
Yeah, usually I let the tour manager handle that, and I would coordinate their frequencies, but it's not up to me how much or when they can record. It's up to the tour manager. So
Oh
frequencies
yeah,
they'll take care of,
absolutely.
but
Yeah.
well, whether or not they record the whole thing, who knows?
Yeah, no, I don't care about that either. It was more about just being made aware of the fact that when there is particularly television media in the building, and when how long they're there and when they're leaving and that kind of thing.
I have a question about my 60 megahertz split that I do for my scans. Why do you need to do that as opposed to just scanning the whole 470 to 600? Well, what I did point out is the spectrum analyzer, particularly TTI, has a limited number of points it actually scans. So if you do the entire spectrum, it takes those X number of points and spreads them across the entire spectrum. So you've got a big space in between each point. Now, probably will get a reasonable scan and be able to tell where the DTV stations are, but not nearly as nice a scan as doing in 60 megahertz chunks. With the Keysight Field Fox, I can do 1,000 points per scan if I set the setting for it. So I can do wider if I want to.
But they're slower
Christopher
too.
Bellamy, I have to find out what the specs on the Field Fox is particular. I know this is the 6 megahertz unit. When I bought it from B Stock in Keysight in Malaysia, it was one of those deals where you tell them what features you want to have on it, and they then enable those features. And I ordered a 3 gigahertz spectrum analyzer, and when it came, he had enabled the 6 gig spectrum analyzer and a bunch of other features, which don't cost the sale place any money because they just put in a code. So it's a great little device. One of my favorite things about this Field Fox is it has a built-in bridge, which allows you to plug one antenna into it, and it will send a signal out that antenna from the tracking generator and measure the reflection of that signal and give you a graph of how good your antenna cable is working with that particular antenna in it.
Hey, Pete, that's a
Yo.
interesting point. This has really nothing to do with software, but everything with actually using hardware. As we're seeing more and more of that coming about and being more affordable, like the, obviously at the lower end of the cost spectrum is the RF Explorer with they have an accompanying tracking generator that's a single device in the same footprint. Obviously, we can go up to the Field Fox, go on up to the Roden Schwartz, all those up there. But I think something that's really important to say here is that you're only as good as that connection. All right. So even if you're practicing every single great tip we've heard today and looking at, your essays plugged into your DA, so I can use as many letters as possible, that's great. But if you've got, horrible antenna cable performance, it's looking at the equally useless data.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
at the very least, when I had my Roden Schwartz, it had a tracking generator in it and had an input and an output. And I wouldn't put the bridge on it, but I just plug in each end of the cable and look at the loss in the cable. And if it's a nice straight line like that, or if it was not straight, then obviously there's something happening inside the cable that's not good.
Yeah,
And
the other thing is that once you have the capability to measure cables, is you have to know when to say, okay, I've measured this one and it's bad. I was on a job where I got parachuted into it at the last minute kind of thing, and I'm hooking up cables, and on like the second day, I noticed that they have this little paint marker thing on the BNC connector, and I go, oh, what's that? And it goes, oh, that's how much loss is in this cable. And they're going, okay, well, this one says -9. Like, why are we using a cable that's got 9 dB of loss in it? Just because you can measure it and write it down doesn't mean the cable's still okay to use. You know, you have to have some standards.
No, definitely.
There, right? You have to set a parameter that's, this is usable, this is not usable.
Yeah.
And so I guess maybe that's a question I would pose to you, Ike. What's that number for you? What's your cutoff?
I was on the same job when we were using new like RG8 type cables. Like a 200 footer would have about 5 dB of loss from one end to the other. And and that's a good thing to really get in the habit of doing, is measure your new cables. Partly because if you get a defective one, you'll find that out before it's run out or taped into a loom or that kind of thing. And secondly, if you know what a new one is doing, then you can sort of track, particularly on a tour where you're out for months and months, is, every month or two when you get a maintenance day or something, is to get the tracking generator out and measure the cables. Because as many people said, Henry Cohen makes this point a lot, they're consumables. They will go bad. Jason
we
Glass
don't like hearing that. That's a costly cable. Cody, I apologize. I don't know the model number of the PWS cable. But obviously you guys have seen the importance of this over the years, because you started, selling your own cables. Do you have any suggestions? One of my temptations is when I see a nice big kink in a cable, you kind of want to write it off, right? But sometimes that's not always possible. Sometimes you're fumbling through, and Video's used all their cables, and I can't steal anymore from them for short jumpers. I'm just trying to get everybody all worked up. Yes, I know they're 75 ohm cables, but anyhow, do you have any recommendations from your perspective on that? Or if Gary even wants to weigh in?
One of the things that I
Cody, your mic is muted.
Oh yeah, Cody, you'll need to turn your mic on.
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go. Yeah.
There we go.
Sorry, I was actually reading a bunch of the questions as far as like what cable we're using and.
Yeah. Because we were talking about, just that maintenance, right? And when do we know that a cable is not good? What's that magic number? I don't know if there is one, but just, what would you use as kind of a parameter?
Yeah, I think following a lot of the things that Ike said with that, when we were having our webinar a couple of weeks ago about this, and just looking at the losses you get just right out of the gate, so even if you're a few dB down on a messed up cable, and then you're getting into poor antenna placement and all that before you even add anything into your signal chain, any loss is no good loss, because you're just going to incur more down the road. So when we were talking on that webinar, just getting your cables tested pretty frequently, especially if you have the luxury of being in a shop or having gear from a shop, and just trying to always make sure they're as good as possible. And then with us using our EchoFlex 10, trying to really keep that stuff in perfect shape almost.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, it's heartbreaking. Most loadouts are heartbreaking. If you care about your cables, it's just painful, because the cables are going to get mauled, and as much as you try and watch over them, it just happens. So
Yeah, we got any other questions that we see there that, you know, you said, Cody, if you see something on there, feel free to,
There was a
uh,
question, somebody had a question about two-way radios, getting frequencies.
right?
I always find just dealing with your house contacts or whoever the house contacts are, if you have a tech manager or production manager that's dealing with the house, I've never had great issues getting the information, even with security frequencies. People are really starting to understand what you do as a frequency coordinator, and they want your help to make sure that they have clean frequencies. And the only way you can do that is if they share the information. So I found that they're more than happy to share that information, that nothing's a big secret. And ultimately, we should all be carrying tools to be able to read those radios. I did an event about a year ago and found a bunch of radios that a security group brought in, and their first question, well, how did you find these? I just looked at you when I went through security and saw that you
Yeah.
don't have a tag on it. It was pretty easy to find. And we were able to find them frequencies that they could use. Usually people apologize and just kind of move on, but never really had a hard time when asking to get that information.
Mhm.
My approach when dealing with real spooks, like civil service or the RCMP or whatever, is the first thing is to take my coordination and go, listen, I know that you're not really keen on giving me whatever frequencies you're using and so on. So this is what I'm using or I'm planning to use. Please have a look at it. And if you see anything that pops up as a problem, let me know and I'll move. And
Yep.
that at least is a good way to get the conversation going. I had that conversation with somebody who was like a radio sergeant at the Ontario Provincial Police at one point. And as the conversation went on, he went, and different radio frequencies will interact to create other frequencies. And I went, yeah, actually, I do know that. That has a lot to do with actually what my job description is, but thanks for pointing that out. But anyway, just opening that conversation, a lot of times it's good if you just volunteer the information first and let them come back. Because if you go up to them and go say, hey man, what frequencies are you on? They're just gonna like either do nothing or revoke your clearance. So start by offering them the information.
Yeah, and I think that's a, good thing to mention there too, is just building a relationship on a positive level there with those people, who don't know who you are or what you're doing there. And you start off with, hey, this is what I'm working with. And then, we're actively scanning too. So we're going to know what's going on if it's going to affect us, and we can bring it up later. But I think that's a great way to do it. Just this is what I'm using. Let me know if it's going to be troublesome to you. And then obviously doing our due diligence to kind of monitor what's happening there if we can see it.
Yeah. Another thing about radios in a coordination, because I get asked that a lot of times, if you're working with a band or whatever, you don't really need to have radios in your coordination. On big sporting events, I have walkie-talkies in there, and the main reason is because it's not uncommon to get a duplicate frequency or two between the West Coast sports truck and their 16 radio frequencies and the stadium food services walkie-talkies or whatever. You're often going to find one or two frequencies that are duplications, even though they're not supposed to be because they're all licensed. And in those situations, you just go, okay, stadium people or truck people usually because they're visitors, please don't use your channel 14. But the other thing when you're allocating frequencies, one of the things that I've seen in having both walkie-talkies and say in-ears or whatever in the same coordination is that when you're down in channel 14, that for example 469 point I think 9875 is a walkie-talkie frequency. And so when you're allocating your in-ears and you're in G1 or whatever, and the first frequency that pops out is 470-100 or 470-125 or something like that, is you might want to consider giving the very, very bottom end of channel 14 some space, because there may be walkie-talkies in that space that are very close to your first in-ear frequency or your first microphone frequency. Whenever you're at the either extreme of the spectrum that we can work in, you want to be kind of careful about what's going on, on the other side of that imaginary line of 470 or 608 or whatever.
Yeah, I find that a lot in some of my fall coordinations that I send out from CP, that I'll get a lot of stuff, especially since we've gone to Axient Digital. People just start and, I need 7 frequencies in G57, and they see that channel 14 is open and they give me 5 of the 7 in channel 14, but they're using 469.975 is their security frequency, and all of a sudden my talent mic is taking hits all the time. So it's always something that I'm looking out for, is what is on the other side of that, because people don't tend to look in their coordination to see what the two-way radio frequencies are, and it's really important.
There we go. And again, it's kind of interesting. We keep coming back to, almost every session comes back to this one central topic, which is around communication, which is how you're dealing with those around you. In my case, I've always embraced two-way radio, not so much coordination, but rather managing that information. Because I'm like, hey, if it's RF, I'm going to own it. Not so much to slow down the process, because I'll say, hey, you guys keep talking over here, but keep me in the communication loop of what's the vendor coming in with, so I can keep my lists updated. Then when I have a problem, we can go back and forth and we can work with one another. And that's just something over and over and over that keeps coming back, is that we have to respect those positions of the other people around us. And RF is all about that. RF is about understanding that everybody has a job to do that day, from the sideline reporter to the presenter on stage to the person on the two-way radio and credentialing or in security or anything else, right? And so that whole communication. Pete, is there any other topics we want to catch before we call it a day here?
I think we're in pretty good shape. There's a few questions in here which I don't really have answers for. A couple of people asked me about my Keysight Field Fox, where I bought it, and I'll have to look it up. I know it was basically Keysight. I bought a Keysight office in Malaysia, and
I think they have an eBay store for that Malaysian.
It was actually in eBay, right?
Yeah.
And it's really one guy in a garage over there who just, you end up speaking to the same guy all the time. And they have a lot of stuff. Now, the thing about, there's a lot of these on eBay as used items, and you want to be careful because of two things. One, there's an old hardware version which doesn't upgrade well, and two, the repair of them is very expensive. So don't take a chance and buy something that's used or refurbished, as far as I'm concerned. This B stock was, because it was not used, it was a demo unit by Keysight. So I'd be careful about it. I've had friends buy stuff, Keysight Field Fox on eBay, and had to do an upgrade, and they couldn't do the upgrade, and the factory wanted like $6,000 to fix it. So
Yes. So Cody, any notes looking through that's the Q&As that you feel like we need to top off here?
There was just a quick one about like some of the models, so like the new J50s to J50As, and kind of how to deal with that. In the models area, you can actually just duplicate that and edit the range, and then just name it what you want to name that. So with the J50A, you could just duplicate that, modify the range to where you want the J50A to be, and then store that.
Below, right.
Yep. So we've been getting a lot of questions about that. And if you need help building that model or any of that kind of stuff with any of those additions going to the A models, just let us know at the support email.
Right. So support@professionalwireless.com. So,
right.
And a lot, again, a lot of those questions you may have that are very specific to the software, use that support email. It's there, and everybody is prepared to get answers as best as possible. So I think that pretty well, brings us to a conclusion today. We did an extended lunch thanks to me booking the restaurant at the wrong time. So we ended up with, 2 crowds coming to lunch, which is great. I'm perfectly happy with that. And we'll keep these discussions going. We're going to have more. RF is always something that generates a lot of interest. And speaking of that, this afternoon, happy hour with our friends from JetWave, and we're going to be talking WYSICOM. I want to know where the name came from, but I'm not going to get that answer this afternoon. But that's something I'm going to work on. But anyhow,
Right.
thank you everybody for joining us. Pete, any closing thoughts?
No, that's it. I just have one little thing here. Here we are with the IAS and the user-defined model screen, and I pulled up the Shure ULXD J5. Let me go to the J50. Where's the J50? J50A. And here on the screen right down here, you can edit the upper frequency limit. What's the upper frequency limit supposed to be now?
607975.
Now, and I just edited it, and I didn't show you on the screen there, but you can also at the same time make a copy of it and then edit that. Be aware that next time you upgrade your version of IAS, those changes will all go away. Your edits won't be there anymore.
Yeah, and there's ways to back up those files of like if you've made a bunch of user-defined models in your IAS, and again, that gets a little more in depth, but you can reach out to us and we can show you where that exists and then how to back those up. So when you do upgrade later on, that can be brought back in.
Cool.
Yep.
There we go. Well, everybody, have a great afternoon. For those of you joining us for happy hour, we'll see you back here at 4 Eastern and on a different link. But thanks again, and thank you, gentlemen, for popping on and providing these insights. So it was a good day.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you,
talk to
Kelly
y'all
and
later.
Pete, for doing
Yep.
this.
Thanks, Kelly.
No
You're
problem.
welcome.
Matt.
See you guys.
Now I have to go have lunch.
Go eat.
See you later.
Bye-bye.